Hi, everyone. Welcome to CrimeCON Express 2, the library's second virtual CrimeCON series in partnership with Mystery Writers of America New York chapter. Though we're looking forward to hosting CrimeCON in person next year again, we're thrilled to be able to once again bring these dynamic sessions to you virtually. Tonight is the kickoff, and in case you haven't already, please don't forget to register for the next 2 sessions. Many thanks to MWA. In addition to all the speakers involved, thanks to Chris Nuff, Jill Fletcher, and Charles Salzberg, they put everything together. They were able to pull everything together. Bravo. And of course, many thanks to the Friends of Ferguson, the library's nonprofit volunteer organization. We are so grateful to the Friends and their advocacy for the library and the community, and always for their generous support. During the program, we'll put links in the chat to info about the Friends and MWA. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our MC for tonight and for this series. Connecticut writer Tom Straw is an Emmy-nominated TV producer and author of 7 New York Times bestsellers under the pen name Richard Castle. He still writes and produces TV, most recently Showtime's Nurse Jackie, and he is also a director on the National Board of Mystery Writers of America. Take it away, Tom.
Thank you, Barbara, and everyone at the Ferguson Library in Stamford. You know, for years, the Ferguson Library has been a terrific venue for CrimeCON's annual in-person panels. And now, for the second time since the pandemic, we've organized this Zoom setting with them so Mystery Writers of America's New York, Connecticut chapter can go virtual, and we thank them for that. Tonight is our first of 3 consecutive Thursday night programs, and this one is called It's My Life, or Not. Writing Outside Yourself. We're honored to have a panel of exceptional authors, plus one who is our moderator. Starting with the panel, Carolyn Kepnes is the New York Times bestselling author of You, Hidden Bodies, Providence, and You Love Me. Her work has been translated into a multitude of languages and inspired a television series adaptation of You that is currently on Netflix. Kepnes graduated from Brown University and then worked as a pop culture journalist for Entertainment Weekly and a TV writer for Seventh Heaven and The Secret Life of the American Teenager. She grew up in Cape Cod and now lives in Los Angeles, where she is right now. International best-selling author Brad Parks is the only writer to have won the Shamus, Nero, and Lefty Awards. His 10 novels have been published in 15 languages, reached #1 in Amazon sales, and won critical acclaim across the globe. He's appeared on annual Best Mystery Thriller lists published by Kirkus Reviews and Library Journal. Brad grew up in Ridgefield, Connecticut, getting his start as a professional writer for the Ridgefield Press. After graduating from Dartmouth, Brad worked as a reporter for the Washington Post and the New Jersey Star-Ledger. He is now a full-time author. His most recent novel, Interference, is a suspenseful romp through the world of quantum physics. Kate White is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 standalone psychological thrillers, including The Fiancé and Have You Seen Me, as well as 8 Bailey Wiggins mysteries, including Such a Perfect Wife, which was nominated for an International Thriller Writers Award. The former editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine, Kate is also the editor of the Mystery Writers of America cookbook. She divides her time between New York City and Las Flores, Uruguay. And now our moderator, Ross Clavin, who has written screenplays for many of Hollywood's top studios. His script, for instance, for Tigerland, starring Colin Farrell, was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award. Ross teaches screenwriting at the graduate level and also privately. His darkly comic novel, Schmuck, was published by Greenpoint Press. Down and Out Books published 3 of his noir novellas, Thump Gun Hitched, I Take Care of Myself in Dreamland, and Cut Loose All Those Who Drag You Down. He's also a playwright and a voice actor heard in such feature films as Revolutionary Road, Casino, and The Sixth Sense. Ross was also a reporter and anchorman for 1010 Wins Radio, RKO Network, and LBC Radio in London, which they tell me is in England. Those are the 4 lives for It's My Life. It's all yours, Ross.
Thank you, Tom Straw, and thank you to CrimeCon Express 2, Barbara Thomas, Alice Knapp, and the Ferguson Library. So we are assigned the question, it's my life or not,
Christoph and Joe Fletcher, who
writing
created this
outside
thing.
yourself. And
Don't want to mention them.
we're getting a little bit of interference here. This brings up all kinds of thorny epistemological questions. So let me ask you this. Have you ever written, just made up something that you didn't do research on, just popped into your head and it turned out to be the best thing in the book? Brad, I'm curious because you wrote about quantum physics. Are there things in there that you snuck in? Is there anything that you just kind of made up or that's a possibility?
Well, that's it's quantum physics, Ross. So how the heck should I know what's made up and what's actually a possibility? No, I mean that's the fun of it, right? I think that the goal sometimes as a fiction writer is to get people scrambling to Google to figure out, wait, what is this guy making up, and what is this is real? And and hopefully most of it's real, and most of it's actually quite plausible, and most of it is well researched. So for example, my latest novel Interference deals with this concept called quantum entanglement, right? For those who are unfamiliar, and I'll keep the physics lesson brief, I promise. It's this idea that every now and then two particles can be born entangled. And when that happens, you can separate them by any distance you want to. You tickle one and the other immediately feels it, no matter how far apart they may have traveled, which is this mind-blowing idea. So like this interaction appears to be faster than even the speed of light, right? So the what if, so that's the real actual, like this is real science. These are actual theories that have actually been proven in laboratories and whatnot. The fictional twist then becomes, well, if you can have two particles that are entangled, what about two human beings? And we play with that idea. And I think when we think about our own lives, haven't you ever thought of like two people whose lives are entangled, whether that's twins or whether that's a couple who's been married for 50 years? And so it's a concept that, while pretty far out there, also feels familiar to us. So I don't know if that's made up or if that's just kind of taking something that's already there and stretching it a little bit. I think it's interesting. I noticed my other two panelists, like I am, we all have journalism backgrounds to a certain extent, right? And isn't that a fun thing to do, is to take something that somebody has told you, because clearly I didn't know anything about quantum physics, and then put my own little spin on it. Kate, Carolyn, I'm sure you guys have done that as well in your work.
Carolyn?
Yeah, in my first book, I was working with this character, and I just kept wanting to put him in situations. And I remember it was like the middle of the night, and I wanted him to be in a costume, and I could see the costume, but he hates Halloween, and I knew he wouldn't do that for Halloween. So I'm just hoping that there's a festival, and then I wrote it, like the outline of what I want, or like the thoughts he would have. And then I found this Charles Dickens festival online, and it was just like the most wonderful moment of, oh God, this is real. And people do dress up like this, and they love the hell out of it, and they do it on an annual basis. And it was a nice moment of feeling like when you follow that instinct, yes, and then you get to go back to your inner journalism part of you that wants to go see if something is real, and it's there. It only gives more legitimacy to what you're writing, especially when you're writing something that takes place in the world as we know it. I like to want something and then see that it is out there.
And how about you, Kate?
Well, I guess maybe because I'm a Virgo and kind of weirdly orderly, I tend not to make up things crazily. And I love doing research. Harlan Coben once told me he thought research was just a form of procrastination. But for me, I want stuff to be legitimate. And, over time, like all of us, I've gotten to know certain people in forensics and law enforcement and attorneys, of course. And so I turn to them. Sometimes just kind of like what Carolyn was saying, there will be little things I start to make up. And it's so spooky when you discover that they are real. Like for a book I did a couple of years ago, I wanted there to be a closed down retreat center on Lake George. And I just made it up. And then I found out there was such a place. The weirdest thing that happened was in a book I wrote, Have You Seen Me, a year ago, I I made up an apartment for this character on the Upper West Side, and I wanted it to have certain aspects that aren't really very common in modern apartments. And then my husband and I decided to leave this brownstone house we'd lived in for many years when our kids were little, on 95th Street, and we moved to this apartment that we bought, this apartment that ended up being almost identical to the apartment I'd written in the book. So I think mostly I don't make it up, but when I do, it is really interesting when you discover you're not that far from the truth.
Yeah, I actually had an entire novel. It was called The Good Cop, where I made up this scenario where cops would be stealing or taking guns, confiscating guns from criminals, and then reselling them to criminals. And lo and behold, about 3 or 4 years later, there was a group of cops out in California who were doing that exact thing. I mean, it does happen. But I think what's interesting though is like both you, Kate, and Carolyn talked about this thing that I think matters to us as journalists, right? When we realize something is real, we write it with greater authority, right? When Carolyn sees that, oh my God, there actually is this Dickens thing. Now I don't feel like I'm kind of just out on this ledge making this thing up that everybody's going to call me on. Now I know, right? And when I know, I can absolutely write it. I think for me, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, having made that transition from journalist to now, I almost never do journalism. Everything I do is made up. Learning to still write with that authority, right? Like learning to write as if I have done all the research and I do have that exact corner that I spent, 3 weeks staking out in my head or whatever. No, I can just create that corner in my head and then write it as if I staked it out for 3 weeks. And that's kind of like, I don't know about you guys, but like for me, that has taken a number of years to grow comfortable with. Like I think when I was first, say, making up that slight detail, like I have a character entering a housing project in Newark, New Jersey, and I know probably 99% of my readers have not been in a housing project in Newark, New Jersey, so I'm going to be okay. But there's that 1% who know I just made up that detail about whatever, and they're going to send me angry notes, and yet 11, 12 years into this thing, how many angry notes have I received about that detail I made up about that housing project? Well, none. So that maybe I actually do have more license to make stuff up than I thought. I always say I now have a BS in MSU. Stuff up.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys kind of feel that way too. Like the more you do this, the more comfortable you get with the making it up.
It's forming a relationship with that inner part of you that's part fact checker. Like, and I think my first job was at Tiger Beat, and it was Tiger Beat. So it was mostly pictures. And my editor was like, here, like write the article and the quotes. And I'm like, but there's no interview. And she's like, people are saying something nice. If you have this actor and it says, I like dogs, no one is going to write a letter and complain. And then I went to Entertainment Weekly with that spirit. And they're like, where are the notes? Where's the tape? I'm like, oh, facts. And then I got so into this idea that everything should be documented and proof. And I feel like it's always a dance from then on in between the two. Like I want things to be real, but I'm also like, right, this is a little Tiger Beatish. I'm allowed to, go with the flow as I see it and as I feel it.
Yeah, a small part of Kate White just died, by the way.
Yes.
How many years did you spend having to run back and forth to lawyers and fact checking everything, Kate?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I like to do research is because when I was running Cosmo and I wrote 8 books while I was there, and it was kind of burning the candle at both ends. And so I would have to run out and do research maybe at lunch or on the fly, and I never felt I had enough time. And one time I was doing a book that involved a fertility clinic, and I ran over, it turned out there was I think maybe Cornell had a fertility clinic not far from my office, and they offered a workshop. And it was just free to the public. But when I went over there, and there were probably maybe 25 people sitting there listening to how the fertility clinic operated. And this woman looks over at me, and at this point, I'm way past the age I could ever have a baby. And this woman says, aren't you Kate White? And I realized, oh my God, what if it ends up like in page 6?
No, that's page 6 right there.
Cosmo ends up in the New York Post. I thought my boss would call me up. Are you trying to conceive at your age? You're supposed to be in this magazine. So what I love now is just being able to have the time to research and do that. And I'm sure, as you found, sometimes when you're researching, you find a detail that you realize can become a plot point that you didn't know before.
Yeah, I find that all the time. And I also find that I'm going to call a friend of mine who still works at the New York Post and tell him you're pregnant, Kate, just for the heck of it.
I'm curious about what it was like for you, Kate, with that having so much input and putting out a magazine and then being in your book. Like, did you every day, did you like, I want to add this, I want to add that? Like, you know, when you're reading so much and learning so much every day and dealing with all that story, all that, you know, the nonfiction, how did you kind of mentally wear those two hats? Like,
Yeah, it was hard because, as you guys know, when you're a journalist, it's all about telling, and fiction's about showing. And I would sometimes pick up things from people you know, on my staff, little things, because my character in the mystery series is a freelance journalist. And I think, just to what Ross was asking us about originally, and the title of the whole webinar is, do we put ourselves in? And what was helpful for me was to sort of tap into this sliver of myself that always wished I wasn't the leader, having to be buttoned up, but was this rogue freelance writer. So that was fun for me to do, to tap into some little sliver of me that wished I could work from home.
And now there's this huge chunk of all of us that wishes we don't have to only work from home all the time now.
How carefully do you prepare for this story? And when you sit down to begin writing, what do you feel you have to know?
So I'll dive in with that. I'm definitely a believer in I'm kind of slightly ripping off E.L. Doctorow. I think, you know, writing a novel is like driving across country at night. You only have to be able to see as far as your headlights. I absolutely believe that. So I want to know what I need to know to write the scene, and maybe not know other things, because I personally, and everybody's going to have their different answer when it comes to this, right? But I want the characters to kind of discover themselves on the page. Like, I've never been that person. You know, I want to have this really good sense of who they are, but then how are they going to react to each different situation I put them in? I don't want to know that until I get there, because I want to see it happen. I want it to be fresh. I want it to feel real, right? So I've always kind of like, you know, I mean, heck, I wrote a 6-book series where I was probably about like 3 books into the series before a major character finally explained herself to me, you know, because I kept asking her these questions like, Tina, what's your problem? Why are you? And then she, you know, finally sat me down. Well, let me tell you, right? And I was glad to have that process of like really discovering Tina, because I always think that, like, as I'm discovering the characters, the readers are going to be discovering the characters, and we're in that journey together. I don't know. What about you guys?
Carolyn?
For me, like, I'm in writing my 4th book about Joe Goldberg, this character has a whole world in his head but lives in the world. So the constant thing I'm looking at is whether or not I know where he is in the scene and what he expects of people. And then it's it's like you talked about when you're like, tell me who you are to these characters, and I'm writing them. And I'm so caught up in his perception that sometimes then I'm going back like, okay, but wait a minute, who is this person really? Like, what is he missing? What signals is he misinterpreting? How would I see them, but how does he see them? And it goes back to the subject of this, getting myself out of there and saying, no, like, I would observe this, but Joe would observe that. And I love how you put it, of that, like, when they won't tell you who you are. I just had this moment last week where writing for like 4 days, like ready to quit, you know, and then the bitch is like, this is who I am. I'm like, oh, thanks. Like, yes.
By the way, that's every day for me. I want to quit. That's only every 4 days for you. That's
work on one, like,
okay.
Yeah.
So actually, I do have a question for you. Okay, so Joe is this creepy guy, right? Like, and you, I mean, we're just meeting, you're on your couch, you're on the other side of the country, but you seem very normal, Carolyn. How do you access that Joe
I was going to ask her the same thing.
Yeah.
I feel like it starts with kind of playing opposites, like, not that I'm some angel, but I was born like, my mom is Catholic, my dad was Jewish, and I wrote my like college essay about guilt and feeling like I have this baseline of like, I'm programmed and like culturally to like feel guilty all the time. And my way into Joe was like, imagine feeling no guilt ever, no responsibility, always thinking that it was your bad luck, that it was your misfortune, no matter what you do. And it's part fantasy in that way, not because, again, I'm such an angel, but because my mind does not work the way his does. So it's really, I don't know. I like that I'm always still like, am I doing it right? You know, because it still feels so far away.
What about you?
Yeah, I love that. So you write a character like that who doesn't feel guilt. Kate writes a character who gets to be irresponsible, and I write characters who are good looking. You know, we all access what we can, right? Like we're living out the dream in fiction. There it is.
Hey, please answer. What about you? How do you approach your work like that?
Well, I always know the ending, and I know if there's a murder, and generally in my books there's at least one, and I generally know why the person did it. And so I often have to do a bit of research to make sure as I go down there, I'm not going to box myself in a corner. But I have traditionally let the characters develop as I'm writing them, which it sounds like Carolyn and Brad do. But and they then kind of reveal themselves, but then I have to go back and do a fair amount of work to fill in once I realize certain things about them. And I would say more recently, I've started to think a little bit more about character arc in the beginning and have a better handle on that. So maybe just because now I'm not running a magazine too, and I get to have the time to do that.
I love it though, like when a character surprises you, right? Like that to me is just the greatest thing that can happen. And it can lead to wonderful twists in a book, right? Where you're like, and therefore you've written 90% of a novel not knowing a certain thing about a character, and then they kind of reveal themselves, or you figure it out and then you go, oh my God. And then actually it's almost better that you don't go back and change all that stuff because you don't want to foreshadow it. Because when you were writing 90% of the book, you didn't know that this person believed this thing, or that, you know, was identified with this or aligned with that. I love that process of like, just surprise.
And on the flip side of that, have you all had the experience where you've got something like a part of the plot engine worked out, a scene that you're in love with, and then you're realizing that the character would never do that, and you have to, and it's to me, that's the murder of the darling that is always, whew.
Yeah. The saddest thing for me a couple of times, and I don't know how the brain does this, just what we're talking about, how it, without you knowing, it figures things out. But a couple of times realizing, oh, he's going to die. And I didn't plan for him to die, but oh, darn, I really like him. And now he's going to die.
See, Kate, I will gather kind of all of my characters in a room in my mind. And I will just explain to them that, like, look, I'm sorry to break this news to you folks, but one of you is going to have to die here. And, you know, the protagonist probably, you know, he or she will know they're safe until the end. So they're kind of like over, like going, ha ha, look at you guys. What are you going to die? It's not going to be me. But, oh yeah, I will do that. And then Carolyn, going to your point of like, when the character won't do something for you, it's, and I finally learned this over the course of however many novels. When I'm writing a scene, right, and it's just not working, and I can't, and I'm beating the hell out of it, and I'm trying to drag it along the ground and all this kind of stuff, and it's still not working. 9 times out of 10, it's because I am making a character do something they don't want to do, that is not natural to them. I'm trying to make them serve my needs, right, and the needs of the plot, and the engine that I've worked out, and all this fabulous stuff. And they're like, no, sorry. Do you know me at all? Oh my God, we've spent 200 pages together and you're going to treat me like that? Are you kidding me? And like, yeah, it's just like learning to respect that process, but then also learning to do something that my wife accuses me of not doing all the time, which is listen, right? Like really listen to your characters and be willing to have those conversations, but just don't do them like I did it this one time. Those of you who are in Connecticut, you won't know what this is, but anybody who lives in the southeastern part of the United States will know what a Hardee's restaurant is. It's a fast food chain. Before the pandemic started, I would do all of my writing at a Hardee's restaurant. I kind of live in this rural area, and it's the only thing open at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it has free refills on Coke Zero, and it didn't have wireless internet, so it was like perfect, right? And I would go to the Hardee's, but when I would get stuck, I would wander around the parking lot, doing what I do, which is talk to myself, right? Which, you know, Carolyn's nodding, Kate's nodding. This is very normal behavior to all mystery writers. It is not so normal to the Virginia State Police. One day I'm doing my normal thing, wandering around the parking lot, muttering to myself, and the state trooper pulls up in the drive-through at Hardee's and tells the woman working the drive-through, he says, "Ma'am, there's a deranged man in your parking lot. You want me to pick him up for you?" And thankfully, I'm friends with all the ladies who work the drive-through, because she said, "Oh, no, you don't have to bother. That's just our author."
We're getting a couple of questions typed in here. You've pretty much answered the question. A couple of people have asked about outlining, which you pretty much answered. But some people are very interested in how the lockdown affected you. Did you get a lot of work done? Did you get no work done? Did you lie on the couch a lot? What happened? Kate.
I have to say that I think I did pretty well in terms of output, because I live now, since I left the magazine business, a fairly solitary existence during the day. I always, my husband is able to work remotely too. And whether we're in New York or in Uruguay, we meet up for lunch. And so it didn't change that much, but I do a fair amount of public speaking. And so I wasn't on the road at all. And that did free things up. And it made me realize that I probably do need a little bit more time every day to focus on the writing. I think mostly it gave me a chance to edit more every day, as opposed to getting through a few chapters, then going back and trying to edit, where it's just like a nightmare then. And so now I do an hour of editing every day. So I think that was a big pandemic breakthrough for me.
How about you, Carolyn?
I respond really well to deadlines, and in normal times, I would always have something planned that I would decide, like, I'm going to have this figured out by that. And I work well the closer it gets to that. So the weirdest adjustment for me, aside from, all of it that we've all dealt with, was having these vats of time and not being able to use my mental tricks on myself. Like, I would try to say to myself, one more episode of this. But it's like, no, I have nothing else to do. I'm not going anywhere for the next several hours. So that was a new job. Like, I feel like I've never had that time in my life where it was very like la-di-da, nothing to do but write. So that was war, because it's just not like, I've never been to, like, I've never been someone to go into the woods for a week. And I feel like, oh, here I am in the woods in my apartment, like this mixed message. Right. I wrote a draft. I wrote a short story. John Tapp is editing this collection, and he was very kind with his edits, because one thing I noticed is that I kept thinking of going back in time. Like, I felt my memory almost regressing, like thinking a lot of the 90s. So the story takes place there, but my brain is all over the place. So the story needed to be in one part of the 90s, and halfway through it, it's like in another part. And he was so gentle of like, oh, I think that you meant, I'm like, oh my God, like this would have made no sense. Thank you. So little things like that. So yes, I would, like Kate said, it's good to have that time to edit, because yes, I really needed it this time.
And Brad, I imagine you got 6 or 7 novels finished.
Oh yeah, Ross, because I really loved having my wife and 2 children Zooming one wall away from me. That was awesome for the productivity, let me tell you. So that was hard. Another thing I missed, honestly, was like just the stimulation of being out and about and talking to people. And not that I'm having like these fascinating world-changing conversations all the time, but I am very clear to my friends and family and everybody else around me, don't tell me anything, because it might end up in my novel, right? And I explain, like whether the fellow parents at my kids' school or doing my kids' activities and sports, like they just say those little things that you find yourself like, oh, I'm gonna pluck that and I'm gonna take that, and like suddenly I didn't have all those inputs. And that was hard for me. Like I felt deprived, but then I also had to remind myself the whole time of, like, very early on in the pandemic, the New York Times did this very helpful chart. It was like, how safe is your profession, right? And so they put everything on this axis, and it was like, so one axis was, the closeness of contact. The other axis was the frequency of contact. So like, the doctors and nurses were all, up here, the first responders, kind of the real heroes of the pandemic. Authors were all the way on the lower left. We were right next to lumberjacks as having the safest possible profession. So I always kind of had to bear that in mind and not get too much of a pity party on myself.
Somebody is asking, we've talked a little bit about this, but I think it's interesting because everybody here has some journalism experience. How did you psychically make the jump from journalism and writing things that are, nailed onto facts, make the jump from that to fiction?
Well, for me, a big revelation for me, because as a girl, I just wanted to be a writer. And I wrote plays, and one was put on in my high school. I put out a little magazine, and I wanted to write books, and I sort of didn't know you had to pick a lane professionally, that it couldn't be all those kinds of writers. And so when I was in college, I won a contest that Glamour magazine had, and it sort of picked the lane for me. And during those years, as much as I love the magazine business, I worked for a fabulous company running Cosmo, and it was really great. The perks were awesome. I didn't want to abandon this other lane about, being a suspense novelist. I think the big challenge for me, though, as I mentioned before, with journalism, it's all about tell. And at Cosmo, we had some, we told a lot about things like mattress moves that will set his thighs on fire and a variety of other things. But we did a fair amount of nonfiction crime stuff. But once I started writing early in the morning, my first suspense novel, I spent a lot of time burning off the need to tell. And I think that first book, I did a lot of editing and rewriting to unload that. And that was probably the biggest challenge for me, going from one area of writing to another.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Carolyn?
I always started out wanting to write fiction, and then a magazine also was kind to me when I was in high school. I got an honorable mention in the Sassy Magazine short story contest, and they sent me a typewriter, and that kind of put me over the edge. So I just kept writing short stories, and then I wanted writing a job, and somehow, like, there's no job where you just graduate from college and you're like, but I'm a fiction writer. There isn't. So I feel like I learned a lot when I was a journalist, and then I would go home and write short stories, and I kept going. And then I did some TV writing. And I think the thing that really turned the corner for me was making a short film where you're completely, you all know, like when you're working with other people in that way, everything is in the real world. So it's kind of like journalism in that sense, that there are restrictions everywhere. And after I made that short film, my God, I was like, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to sit down and write a book where I don't have to get a permit, and I don't have to like deal with humans. I'm just going to sit and go into my head and do whatever I want.
All right, so I already outed myself as I like to steal things from people, Carolyn. And at some point, I'm going to write a character who wins the Sassy Magazine fiction contest and gets a typewriter for it, and it launches them into, because that's like perfect origin story right there. Thank you for that. But I think going back to the more serious question of like, how do you make the jump? I mean, it is, I always joke that when I was a journalist, if I made stuff up, I would get fired. And then as a fiction writer, if I don't make stuff up, I'll get sued. So, it was a hard transition to make, but, I think all along I was always going back and forth between the two in my mind, a lot like Kate. And so like, I would be reading Mary Higgins Clark, right? And going, all right, like I am turning these pages ferociously. How is she making me do this? And kind of analyzing that, and then bringing that to my journalism, right? And then it became a case of, when I started writing fiction, bringing the stuff that made the journalism come alive into the fiction. And so you were constantly going back and forth between those worlds. But the binding factor is these are all stories, right? And whether it's a real story or a made up story, the elements that make them work, you have a hero, you have a villain, you have obstacles that the character or the source cannot overcome, or these are like universal things that are true no matter what the medium is, and kind of learning those rules and learning what makes it work, and then applying it to wherever the specific rules of the thing you're writing for happen to be.
Yeah, and Kate with Cosmo, like, yeah, why do we get Cosmo? To find out why men do the things they do, which is very inspirational for my writing.
And maybe us guys are reading the Cosmo too, just to kind of, research, figure stuff out. I mean, this is absolutely
having the other team's playbook. I remember Tina Brown, when she was running Vanity Fair, to your point, she said that it had all the ingredients of a best-selling novel: sex, love, greed, death, and so they both have that. But I do think that you sometimes see people who are aspiring novelists sometimes make that too much tell mistake for sure.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you over explain and let what the character's feeling or doing, as opposed to letting it just kind of unfold. Like in a movie, you just know he's angry from the look on his face. You don't have to say he feels angry. And so I think that's one of the things I know I've heard fiction teachers talk about, that you've got to burn off that need to overtell. You have to just let the reader experience through seeing it.
Right. Somebody once said that all stories actually should start off, and then one day a stranger came to town.
Yes, that's great. Hey, Ross, I just wanted to ask you, how does some of this relate to somebody who does both, the screenwriting and the fiction? Is it a different process, what you steal from real life for each thing, or is it pretty much the same?
I think at base it's the same. I think what Brad was saying is true. Once you begin to learn to tell stories and see what the basic, I don't want to say mechanisms, but the way stories are constructed, you can do it it's just a leap from film to the page. It depends on what you're going to show, really, or what kind of information you're giving out. And the other thing is that film works in terms of action for the most part. And that's very difficult for a lot of people who are strict novelists, have a tough time with that often. The people who don't have a tough time, oddly, are poets.
Yeah, because the poets, the poets are all,
screenwriters.
they're all looking at us like, you guys have 80 to 90,000 words to say what you want.
Right.
What is your people's problem? You should be able to blow this out of the water. Come on, I do it in 400 for goodness sakes.
Right, and you can do a lot. I mean, it's interesting to go back to older novels where they were written where they were assuming you were going to skim the parts that you didn't want to read, which I don't think happens so much anymore. Now those parts are gone.
Yeah, right.
But you can see it in films also, where people would get a phone call and then you'd see them, okay, I'll be right over. And you'd see them walk out the door, shot of them in the street, they'd get in the car and drive over. Now they get I'll be right over. And the next scene is a guy knocking on the door, So
yeah, I mean, I think
of the information we're being given has changed.
Right, and across all media, attention spans are just getting shorter. They just are, and I often, when I talk to groups of writers, who inevitably, are of a certain age, that the book they fell in love with, the thing that made them want to be a writer, was a book written 30, 40 years ago, right? And you kind of have to say, like, that was an awesome book, absolutely, but the expectations of your audience have changed, and you don't have as much time as you used to hook them. And because, you know what? What couldn't somebody do 40 years ago? Take this thing out of their pocket and have all the entertainment in the universe right here. So like, I have to be better than this all the time, right? And so do you. And and so things have changed, obviously.
A friend of mine who's just retired as a New York City homicide detective told me it's not even fun being a detective anymore. So you sit there at the computer and solve the crimes half the time.
Right.
Going back to something.
I love old Law and Orders for that reason, where it's like 1993. You're like, what's this? Like this computer? Like, we're not going to use that. And he just was like horrified, and it's like.
Something Brad just said though. What was Brad? What was the book that you read that made you want to be a writer, or books?
So honestly, I was not. So this is not a great answer, but it's kind of true. I wasn't much of a reader as a kid. And then all of a sudden one summer, I got swimmer's ear. So, and I was in Ridgefield, Connecticut, just up the road from Stanford. And I had swimmer's ear. I mean, I couldn't go in the pool, which was all I ever wanted to do as a kid. And so like, I was stuck at home and I was just bored, and it was, 1983 or whatever. So, life was hard back then, kids. And I picked up this book called Gentle Ben by Walt Morey. It was a story about a boy and his bear in Alaska. And it just caught my imagination. And I read it, 30 times over easily. I actually still have it. I stole it from the Ridgefield Public Library. I have since apologized and gotten them several copies of Gentle Ben to make up for my sins. But that just kind of started me on reading. And I think once you start going down that road, you just, you find another book and another book and another book. But yeah, for me, it was Gentle Ben. Who knew? What about for you guys?
I think for me, I don't know if Carolyn can relate to this. It was a Nancy Drew book, and it happened to be in my grandmother's a room in her house. It was kind of like a library, and it was The Secret of Redgate Farm, and it had the most compelling title and cover. And I was just drawn across the room at maybe 11 or 12. And then, in high school, I read the classics, but no suspense fiction. And then when I was in college, Esquire ran a section called What Every Young Man Should Know. And of course, since I wanted to understand men, I decided to read it. But one of the little boxes was the 10 best crime novels of all time. And one of them was The Big Sleep, which I just loved. Another one was Josephine Tay, and there was, Dashiell Hammett on there. And so I didn't know there were any other suspense books other than Nancy Drew. And once I went through that list of 10, I was just then totally hooked.
And Carolyn, what about you?
I do relate to the Nancy Drew. I liked the Nancy Drew files, which were they were updated for the late 80s, and they were sleazy, but it was that, it goes back to being a kid and reading a book and feeling like I was there, and feeling like you lived a life that you didn't. And that really motivated me. And then later in life, with sitting down to write a book, I feel like the last book I read before writing my first book, my first published book, I should say to everyone. Yeah, there are others that'll never learn on. That was Emily Alone by Stuart Onan. And I felt like that she existed and that I had existed through her. And the writing in that book was so powerful to me. And the mental trick that I was like, no, she exists in this world. I believe that I could go drive over and meet her. That is a real person. No one can tell me different. And I wanted to try and do that, because for me, that experience that you get when you're reading something and connecting on that level is just so powerful. And what a good challenge to take on.
And as you grew up, were you influenced by I would assume you were influenced by other people. Also.
Yes. I mean, when I went to look at colleges, my mom was like, don't take that book with you. I'd started reading American Psycho, and we're doing the college tour. And to this day, she's like, we're in all these seedy motels, and I'm sitting there in the middle of the night with that book, not sleeping at all, as we walk onto campuses with all these scary young preppy guys. I'm like, yes.
And that's why you end up at Brown, Carolyn. There it is.
And, of course, Stephen King, when I was little, that feeling like he made me look at the world in a certain way, especially growing up in New England. Those people who they write in a way that informs what you think when you hear a noise in the middle of the night is so powerful to me. It's just more fun if you read to live, Yeah.
No.
No.
I remember I read the book as a kid. I read the book Shane. And I was growing up in New York, and to this day, I have never been on a horse, but I decided I wanted to write Westerns. In school, we were fortunate enough when I was in high school to have many teachers who were avoiding the draft. So we had all kinds of great people in there who would not have been teachers otherwise. And one of them was a guy who was a newspaper reporter. And he took me aside and he gave me a Hemingway story to read. And I read it and didn't like it. And I came back and told him so. And he said, really? Read it again. And he explained a couple things to me. And I became a major fan of that kind of writing. And I think that leads to other people. Then to get that out of your system, you read, Faulkner or Chandler or somebody.
That's so true. I won a little prize in this Hemingway Center contest. And I remember for a year after that, just because the name of the organization was that, everything I wrote was wannabe Hemingway. And then I remember reading Lucinda Rosenfeld, and it was kind of this great smack on the face of you're not that, and you're always reading and growing.
Yeah.
Really, I find very inspiring is contemporary literary fiction that has a mystery at the center, like Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes, and that fabulous book, Asymmetry, which was out, that was by the author had a fling when she was young with Philip Roth. And it's just such a brilliant book, but it's a real literary fiction. And yet when there like atonements like that, when there's a mystery at the center, I find that so inspiring because the writing is so breathtaking. But I guess like so much in life, there is a mystery in the middle of it.
Mhm. It's also interesting, I think, especially with crime fiction, that there are people writing crime fiction who were actual criminals, and their books are not as good as people who are just writers.
Yeah, I'm reading a book by Lane Fargo right now. And I should be doing a better job giving her a plug because I cannot think of the title. Lane Fargo, and it's called, I don't know, but Lane is a delightful person, in no way a psychopath or anything like that. But she's writing basically from the standpoint of a vigilante who goes and kills rapists, basically, and it is absolutely delightful. Honestly, it's wonderful. And I'm pretty sure, like I said, I don't think Lane has broken any of the laws that she is describing this character breaking. I mean, she just burned some guy alive who, by the way, really deserved it. So, I mean, you know, there's nothing like a writer who can get you to actually empathize with the serial killer. Pretty good stuff.
I had a weird experience once where I was at a literary conference and a mystery conference in the UK. And I started talking to this famous author. I'm not going to say her name, but I was telling her I just read this great book by a forensic psychiatrist about Scott Peterson. And he told these things about Scott Peterson, who killed his wife, Lacey, on Christmas Eve, and that his grandfather had been murdered on Scott Peterson's grandfather had been murdered on Christmas Eve. And the grandmother put the mother up for adoption. And so his point was that in family histories, things repeat themselves, that you can't escape those patterns. And with Scott Peterson, birth kind of equaled death because his mother put the first two kids up for adoption. So I'm telling this to this very famous writer, and I'm just saying, it's fascinating how you can escape the past, that there's this thread that goes through. And then I realized later, she had helped a friend murder the friend's mother when she was 16, and it had come out years later. And I realized, oh my God, how embarrassing. I've just given her a little lecture on not escaping the past, and she had killed somebody.
We're getting a typed in information here from Marjorie Tucker, who says the name of the Lane Fargo book is They Never Learn.
Yes, that's it. This is the problem when you read things on your ebook. You don't have the cover in front of you all the time to reinforce what the title is.
Right. Thank you, Marjorie. Somebody else is asking, how do you name your characters?
Random name generator on the internet, baby. Either that or somebody who has like won a charity contest to have a name in my book. I love doing that because it's one less name I have to come up with. Or I don't know, sometimes they just come to me. I don't know, but like Carol and Kate, like that's always hard for me coming up with the names. I'm terrible at it.
Oh, I love it. I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I love it. That's what brings out the poet in me and the like playful spirit. I'm like, oh, I get to give this person a name. Sometimes it's out of the blue. Sometimes it changes, right before that copy edit. Like, wait a minute, I know what your name is now. I love thinking of what it would be like to have that name. That's so much of how it leads me into a character, into like the thing you don't choose is your name. And I don't know, names forever. When a narrator is unnamed or someone doesn't have a name, I'm like, ah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just sometimes I'll look just across the room at something that's lying there. One day I was at the Morgan Library in New York, which has art exhibits, and I saw the list of donors. And I thought there are a lot of good names there, and I took a few. It didn't match them up exactly, but then even if in the beginning, it's often a placeholder because I have to feel it. I have to feel like, yeah, she's really a Claire or he's really a Tom. In fact, it's funny, Tom Straw, I had about 7 characters named Tom because I love the name Tom. And it's almost embarrassing. I hadn't realized how much I was doing it. And a copy editor pointed it out one day. Do you realize that in your previous books, you've had several people by the name of Tom, but I don't care. He has to be Tom.
I also get that. I don't know if you guys have had this. So readers have told me a number of times that like, don't start multiple characters' names with the first letter.
Right.
And I get guilty of that all the time, where like suddenly, and a copy editor, always a copy editor pointing out like, you have 5 people whose names start with M. And that's when, yeah, I'm going through Carolyn and suddenly like, okay, I guess Marcus is going to be a Tom, but not
The
a Tom.
Kardashians can do it, but not us. Yes, I feel like I got my master's in alliteration at Tiger Beat, and I've never fully been able to let it go. So I let myself do that in early draft. Like everyone starts with an A, like yay, and then.
Well, we can't tell the Kardashians apart, so that should be a lesson right there.
So we're getting close to the end of this. I have one other question quickly. I'd be interested to know what you think the biggest mistake young writers make is. I had this discussion one time with my crime writer friend, Charles Salzberg, who helped put this panel together. And we both agreed that it was that they quit too soon. They got discouraged. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like I wanted to get the praise at some times in my life when I was younger, more than I wanted to earn it and work on it. And then when I was tired of working on something, instead of taking a break, I thought, I'll send it. Here, New Yorker, like, you're gonna love this one. And on my calendar, I would have like, the date circled of when I was allowed to submit again. I was very eager to get somewhere. And then I was denying myself the time to put something in a drawer and pick it up a week later and know that like, just because you're sick of something doesn't mean you're sick of it. You're sick of it on that day, but a week later, things are going on in the back of your head. You're going to read it differently. And you can't skip that time by having a writer's group. Writer's groups are great, but at the end of the day, like you still need to give yourself time to think and figure out what you want to say.
Yeah, I think you've got to write every day, and they might think I'll just write on vacation. And I think you also have to figure out the time of day that works best and what that kind of writer's cocktail that works for you. Is it silence or some mood music? But I would say of the writers, aspiring writers who've sent me stuff and asked, could I help them get an agent? I would say one mistake is they don't want to look at what's not working. They're locked into it. And I think a big part of it to be successful is to see when it didn't work and learn from your failures and not let your spouse tell you, come on, people are just jealous or, whatever. That the people who I see have not been successful sometimes haven't wanted to give up on a project, haven't had to let themselves examine what isn't working, haven't wanted to read the notes. They've just, pumped themselves up to believe in it without being critical.
It was the great Reed Fail. I'm speaking of him as if he's dead. Reed Fail Coleman, very much still alive, just for the record. Reed always has a saying. He says, fall in love with writing, not with what you've written.
That's it.
Self-loathing is helpful sometimes.
Self-loathing is very, very important, but I don't think we need to tell any writer that they need to do more self-loathing, right? Like, I think we all do that pretty naturally.
Yeah, for sure.
There are writers who loathe the process of writing and drive themselves that way.
Well, it's the old Dorothy Parker. I hate writing. I love having written.
Right.
I think that's all of us at times, right? But I think honestly, I have found the opposite to be true. The more I've gone along in the business, the more I have to fall in love with the process, because that's actually the one thing I can control, right? Like there's so much out, and especially, the more you get into this, like you just can't control whether the New York Times has reviewed your book or whether Barnes and Noble has decided to order 50,000 copies or 500. Like, there's just things that really have a huge determination on your success that you can do nothing about. And that's very hard. And so like time and time again, I find when I'm in my unhappy place, it's when I'm trying to oh my God, don't even get me started on the Amazon algorithm, right? Like you will never control the Amazon algorithm. The people who work at Amazon, most of them don't understand it and can't control it. How are you going to? So leaving all that stuff aside and thinking about what I can control, which is, what those characters are going to do and what that twist is going to be. And can I dig a little deeper in this scene and bring out a little more? And when I'm doing that, I'm just much, much happier than when I'm thinking thinking about all the other stuff. So no matter what part in the process you are, there's meat on that bone. So like, you cannot make that agent return your call or return your email, and you cannot make that editorial table at a publishing company fall in love with you the way they need to. And you could just go on and on and on and on. But again, you can focus on what you can control. I think I've made the point.
Can control sitting there and getting the words out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
also, don't
yeah.
write with the internet on. Don't write with the
I
internet
do.
on.
I'm the opposite. I like
Oh
it.
my God, Carolyn, you're the worst. Don't write with the internet on. No.
That's my other thing. Do what everyone has their own thing that works for them. It's like you said about waking. Some people are early, some are late. Like the internet, I love having it there.
Yeah, find out what seduces you. Like Lisa Gardner once told me she always has a scented candle. If that works for you, do it. I think it's finding the tricks that keep your butt in the chair.
Yeah.
Different.
And don't drink too much, I think, is the other. Well, listen, this has been great. Carolyn Kepnes, Brad Parks, and Kate White, thank you so much. And thanks to the Ferguson Library. I do want to add that all of their books are available to be bought at Elm Street Books and elmstreetbooks.com. And Elm Street Books, Elm Street is a great place to have a crime, I think, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
We're a nightmare.
And what's your latest book? Give me the titles. Kate?
Mine is The Fiancé, coming out June 29th, standalone.
Okay. Carolyn?
My book out now is You Love Me, and it is the third book in the series about Joe Goldberg that is called You.
Uh-huh.
And my next one is called Unthinkable. It comes out July 27th, and I win my agent's love and appreciation because I actually had the book in the cover that I could wave about. So, good win for me.
I'm looking around. No.
Oh, wait, wait.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Now your agent loves you too. Excellent job.
Hold it up. There it is.
Yep.
Excellent. Again, elmstreetbooks.com or Elm Street Books. All of these are available. Thank you very much to CrimeCONN Express, Barbara Thomas, Alice Knapp, and Tom Straw. If you're there, I'm going to throw it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Russ. And thank you and your guests. And Kate White, by the way, on the subject of Tom names, imagine my surprise in junior high school when I was reading The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. And in the first chapter, a guy goes into a pub and he says, "Is there not a Jack Rag or Tom Straw among you who will buy my goods?" So I thought, well, there's a name that I can't use now, except in writing anyway. I too would like to thank your guests and Ross for doing a great job. Zoom in next Thursday at 7 for Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, Breaking Out of Genre Tropes. The moderator will be Sari Rosenblatt. Panelists will be Charles Coe, Juliet Grames, and Luann Rice. Thanks to Mystery Writers of America, New York's Connecticut chapter for putting this on. Special mention to Chris Hot Mike Knopf, Jill Fletcher, and Charles Salzberg. We're grateful to the Ferguson Library in Stamford for its ongoing support. And that includes President Alice Knapp and programming specialist, you see her right there, Barbara Thomas. Without them, it would be murder. A reminder that tonight's hour was recorded and will be available on YouTube tomorrow. So if you missed any of it, go to the Ferguson Library link. On behalf of Ross Clavin, Carolyn Kepnes, Brad Parks, and Kate White, thanks and good night. This is Johnny Olson speaking.